the last 90 minutes or so, I guess, something like that, in whatever the metaverse might be, whatever game space might be, whatever history and memory might be. We circle all the way back to where we are right now and right here. That is in Dubai and in the UAE and the region in general. And I just want to remind you that for several years now, Dubai and the UAE have explored ways of nurturing one of the most forward-looking crypto and blockchain-driven ecologies. And it gives me great pleasure to invite Saeed Al Darkmarki, who I asked him to outline some of the notable private but also public sector initiatives in this space. And then I want to talk a little bit about these recent announcements that we've seen in the last few months from the Dubai World Trade Center Cyptozone, and also the new law and legislation that Sheikh Mohammed announced just a few days ago. So Saeed Al Darkmarki is the founder of Sheesha Finance and MD of Casper Labs MENA region. He was nominated Investor of the Year at the AIBC Summit, UAE. Saeed has investments in over 40 crypto projects and is a board member of various organizations, including RealX, MENA FinTech Association, and many, many more. Will you please join in welcoming Saeed Al Darkmarki? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Maybe I'll introduce myself. Saeed Al Darkmarki, founder and CEO of Sheesha Finance. I got into the blockchain and crypto world about 5 years ago when I co-founded Alphabet Digital Currency Fund. Before that, I used to work in Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is one of the largest global sovereign wealth funds. So I came from a traditional investment background. And then 5 years ago, one of my partners at Alphabet called me out of the blue and he said, hey, I want to set up a fund. I know you have a fund management background. Will you be my partner? And I said, sure. What is the asset class that this fund is going to be investing in? And he said, crypto. And at the time I said, what the hell is crypto? I've never heard of this before. And he asked me if I heard of Bitcoin. And I said, I've heard of Bitcoin because of the way it's being used illegally, like for example in Silk Road. And he encouraged me to actually look into the fundamentals of Bitcoin and the fundamentals of blockchain technology. And when I did so, for me, it was a no-brainer to actually just dive straight into it. And I sold all my personal assets to get into Bitcoin. And then from Bitcoin, I angel invested in probably over 100 projects over the last 5 years. Been very active with the technology itself. I think blockchain technology is going to change the future. It's going to change the world, especially money as we know it and financial assets as we know it, including art. And I'd love to talk a bit more about that and my experiences in that sector.
Wonderful. Would you like us to put your presentation?
I think, yeah, I mean, we can talk openly about what we've been doing.
Sure.
I don't need to present. I think it's a small room, so I'd rather answer questions and
of course.
talk openly.
It's nice to hear about how you got when and how you got involved in the space. But earlier on, we were talking about the idea of earliness, and earliness is a big metric in the space, but it's also something that's evolving, and there are different kinds of early. How would you characterize how early the space was when you got involved compared to where we are now?
So I think if you compare blockchain technology to the internet, so the internet revolutionized information and how we use information, and I think blockchain technology is revolutionizing finance and financial assets. So I think 5 years ago when I got into the space, it would have been considered pretty early, very early. There were people who were involved in the industry for more than 5 years before that as well. But I think if you compare the internet and blockchain technology, 5 years ago, it was kind of like when we were interacting with the internet using dial-up modem. And today it's like how we're interacting with the internet using Wi-Fi and broadband. But I think there's still a lot more development that's yet to happen in the technology itself. There's a lot of use cases that are coming out where blockchain technology is being used. One of them is NFTs, which is what digital art is and what's being used in the art world. But I think there's a lot more use cases that are going to come out in the future. And one of them is, for example, decentralized finance, which is disrupting the centralized finance systems. But I think, it's still very early in the tech. I think if you think about when the internet came out in '99, 10 years after that, it was starting to develop. And today it's very much mature and very well developed. But I think there's still another 5 to 10 years before blockchain technology actually matures to a level where it's being used at a huge, wide scale and widely adopted too.
And just again, in that timeline, let's say, because it has been notable how, if we take something like DeFi, or we take one of the principles, you could say utopian principles of crypto, which is to bank the bankless, for example. What this has led to is, on the one hand, a kind of, in the same way that, let's say, the prospect of the electric vehicle was for a very long time aggressively suppressed, marginalized by the traditional motor car industry. We have seen over certainly the decade plus that Bitcoin has existed, that traditional finance has been aggressively oppositional, and to the extent where these are scams, these are Ponzi schemes. Why would you ever invest in these? And whether it's very notable CEOs of huge banks, investment banks, and of course this is something that has only very recently changed in the last year. But in that timeline, if I'm not incorrect, Dubai in particular, around the time maybe when you got involved in the space, seemed to get interested and seemed to get engaged and seemed to sort of suggest that actually we're going to take this on, both in the private sector, but also, importantly, the governmental from level of governance, no? Could you say something about that? Because, of course, it fits into this very nice narrative of Dubai being future forward, etc. But it would be really interesting to hear how Dubai fits in that timeline.
Yeah, I think the UAE has been very blessed in having, the rulers of the UAE have been visionaries from the first day that the UAE was created. I think it continues to be embracive of all the latest and emerging technologies that are coming out. And I think whenever there's something new, Dubai always wants to be the best or the first at it. And I'm not surprised that even from 5 years ago, the government and the rulers were very much proactive in encouraging people to learn about the technology. And then when it came up with the Dubai blockchain strategy for the 2021, now you see a lot of government sectors are actually starting to use blockchain technology. So an example would be DEWA. DEWA is using blockchain technology for, you talked about electric vehicles, and its electric vehicle charging is using blockchain. And there's countless use cases of blockchain technology that are being used by the government and the private sector. And I think the work that I've been doing with Casper Labs, which is a company that built Casper blockchain, which is a layer 1 blockchain technology, we've been talking to a lot of government entities over the last 2 years, and a lot of them are kind of accepting to blockchain technology if they see the benefits that it brings. And I think, you can see it now because even the onshore regulator, the Emirates Securities and Commodities Authority, are now, having a framework around crypto assets and blockchain technology. And now there's also kind of a separate regulator known as the virtual assets regulator. So I think, we've been very blessed here, and I think, the government is very much encouraging of all the latest technologies that come out there. I think people kind of have the misconception between cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, which is one use case of blockchain technology, which was the first use case of blockchain technology, and blockchain technology itself. you can use blockchain technology without having a cryptocurrency attached to it. It's just that the idea of raising money and giving people who invest in a project or a company tokens or cryptocurrencies in return for investment, that's what come about in the last 5 years. And a lot of these projects that raised a lot of money over a short period of time actually abused the money that was entrusted to them, and they just, a lot of founders of projects just left without actually fulfilling the objectives of the capital raise that they did. So there was a stigma with what's known as ICOs in 2017. But now there's a new kind of, the market is maturing, investors in the market are maturing, and you're seeing a lot more kind of innovation and development that's happening with blockchain technology.
And yeah, just to push that a little bit further in terms of, again, I mean, it does feel that it's literally in the last year. I mean, I think 2021 really did feel like a watershed year in terms of, I mean, both the expansion into the retail market, whether it's the kind of GameStop meme coin kind of stuff that Dorian was talking about before, but also importantly, the fact that pension funds and no investment bank worth its kind of reputation would not now include crypto as as in its basket of recommended investments. What do you think happened in 2021 to make that switch?
So I think just like with most other technologies, for example, if you look at Zoom and other voice kind of conferencing technology, because of the pandemic where people can't meet face to face, that just boomed, and there's a lot of people that are using Zoom and still remotely working and using that technology. And I think at the same time, especially with the gaming use case of blockchain technology, where there was gaming platforms that were using blockchain technology and issuing a cryptocurrency and allowing the user base of gamers to actually earn cryptocurrencies in return for spending time playing games. So you would find that a lot of the people that were in the poorer populations, like for example Philippines or countries where their local currencies have been so devalued over time, they're actually earning a lot more than they would just by working a normal job. So I think there's been a lot of use cases that have made it much more attractive for retail to actually even use blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. So I think, especially from the pandemic, that's really kind of made a lot of people use technology, and especially blockchain technology.
That's interesting. So that you do think, in a way, the pandemic was almost like a kind of system shock,
yes,
that brought all of this forward to our present.
For sure.
Yeah. So could I ask you about this announcement? I think it was in November or December, about the Cyptozone, and the fact that it may well be housed, I believe, at the World Trade Center. It was very tantalizing. We didn't get many details. I don't know how much you can say or not say, but it would be great, I think, for our audience, again, to hear what this latest chapter is in terms of Dubai's engagement in the space.
Sure. This was the news associated with the Dubai World Trade Center as a free zone. And the reason why it was big news is because Binance, which is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, and probably even against other traditional finance exchanges, it's one of the largest exchanges in the world at the moment, they decided they wanted to kind of set up in the DWTC. But there is actually another free zone, which is the Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, the DMCC, which has a crypto center. There's currently 200 crypto companies that are established there. My company, Sheesha Finance, is established there as well as an operating entity. But I think a lot of the free zones have embraced and encouraged crypto companies to set up here in Dubai. And because of the tax-free kind of benefits that companies get, they were encouraged to come here, and DWTC is one of them, but the DMCC was actually in the crypto kind of market well before the DWTC. But you're seeing more and more free zones, and I think the Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, they're actually looking at setting up a blockchain sandbox with the onshore regulator, and there's many other free zones that are actually coming on to and embracing cryptocurrencies as well.
And so, what's the timeline? Do we have a timeline on the new crypto zone at the
I think
World
the
Trade Center?
Dubai World Trade Center, I think it's ongoing at the moment.
Yeah.
They've opened up for crypto companies, but the DMCC, I think, is far more advanced. They
Yeah.
have around 200 companies, and their target is 1,000 crypto companies by the end of this year. But I think at some point this year, you'll start seeing a lot more companies coming into Dubai.
Now, obviously, one of the very practical ways in which the contest between centralization and decentralization gets deployed legally is through regulations, regulatory frameworks, and ultimately the extent to which state-based governments will intervene in the managing, the regulation, the legislation of these technologies, but also these economies, which are also cultures. No, there's something in the DNA of, let's say, I mean, it's important to remember that the white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote is coming out directly from the financial crisis of 2008, 7, 8. And also, very linked to the kind of anti-capitalist movement, or the anti-bank movement, maybe more specifically at the time. And so you get the birth of these certain notions of like the sovereign individual, no? And this idea of which I believe is again a sort of an ethos behind DeFi, that you should have agency, over your wealth, over your capital, and that it shouldn't be put in the hands of these very vague multinational corporations, et cetera, et cetera. So it's curious because as crypto and blockchain technologies obviously have become more and more mainstream, and also just the amount of capital that they now possess, it does seem to have now appeared onto the radars of almost every government. And so we saw Biden make an announcement almost the same time, within 24 hours, that Sheikh Mohammed did. How does Dubai play that kind of high wire act between regulation and non-regulation, between appealing to a sector that, on the one hand, as I say, seems to be spiritually invested in the idea of as little regulation as possible, but at the same time, from the perspective of the Dubai government or the UAE government, they have to be seen to be executing best practices, no? So.
Sure, yeah, I think it's very, very difficult to actually kind of regulate a technology that's decentralized in nature. And you were talking about decentralized finance, and decentralized finance is simply a protocol that's governed by the people that are using the protocol or using a product or service on the protocol. But it's easier to regulate centralized entities and central banks and so on. It's more difficult to regulate decentralized kind of applications and decentralized products and services. So I think the regulators and the government have to kind of educate themselves and kind of speak to the people that are involved in these markets and find out, how they operate, how is the consumer, how is the user protected by using these protocols. And then they can make a much more informed judgment. And even the kind of the framework that came out, a few days ago, that's still very much, there's still areas where it can be developed and it can be improved on, and it's not perfect, but at least it's an effort to kind of, regulate something that's extremely difficult to regulate. And I think, the USA has kind of woken up now to see that actually who is the biggest user of blockchain technology is China. And China is kind of competing with the USA now. So if the USA kind of stifles innovation, especially in blockchain technology, then they'll be left behind, and it's most likely going to be China. So that's a reason why they've kind of said, okay, they've woken up to it, and they've said, okay, this technology is here to stay, so we need to regulate it and we need to govern it. But I think cryptocurrencies is an alternative to traditional currencies. Because if you see most traditional currencies, the effect of inflation on them over the last 50 years has been tremendous. Like, if you look at the value of the dollar today compared to 50 years ago, it's completely like really, really devalued. And you're not talking about other currencies like Zimbabwe and Colombia, where their actual currencies are like pretty much completely hyperinflated.
Yeah.
So it's an alternative for people who have really weak traditional currencies in their countries to use. So, for example, El Salvador, they've embraced Bitcoin as their actual reserve currency, rather than the dollar or the local currency. So I think over the last few hundred years, you've seen cases where the traditional currency has been pegged to gold or an asset or a commodity, and then it's been unpegged because the central bank wants to print more money to pay for their debts, which they've accumulated over the many years, over the so many wars that have happened in the past. So I think people are now, a lot more educated than they were like 50 to 100 years ago. And people can see that central banks are, abusing the trust that people have placed in them, and even governments. There's certain governments where the people don't trust them. But cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology gives you a trustless layer where you don't have to trust a central authority or a central party. You trust the code, an algorithm, and you trust that it's going to be fair to everybody that's participating in that system.
You mentioned China, Saeed, and I think obviously one can't have almost any discussion without talking about China, but particularly in this space, we've seen them, again, in the last certainly 18 months, make a very kind of aggressive move towards, what could be called, blockchain with Chinese characteristics or something like this, right? And that has involved beta testing their own CBDC, central bank digital currency. I believe in summer of 2020, I think in Shanghai initially, around 200,000 wallets, something like that. To the move last May, where they then kicked out all the crypto mining, and that some 78% of the world's crypto mining took place in China. And so that was, again, it's no surprise that the Chinese authorities' attitude towards this technology would be, we love the technology, we don't necessarily love the decentralization part of it. There had been talk about a CBDC here. It's one of the things that even Joe Biden mentioned. Is this the way in which, again, like centralized state and statecraft feel comfortable in engaging with the technology, do you think?
Yeah, sure. I think central bank digital currency is one use case of blockchain technology. It means that if a central bank has a central bank digital currency where they can actually monitor in real time the effect of monetary policy and different decisions with monetary policy, if they can see it in real time and see exactly where the money is going across all different sectors of an economy, that makes it much more easier for a central bank and a government to determine monetary policy. So I think blockchain technology makes a lot of things more efficient, and that would include central bank monetary policy. So I think, I'm not surprised that China are looking at it. I'm not surprised the US is looking at it. The UAE is looking at it. There's many countries, many central banks that are actually piloting central bank digital currency because there are benefits even for central banks to use blockchain technology. And then when you were talking about crypto mining, with the Chinese banning crypto mining, all the Chinese miners, the mining companies started, looking elsewhere. And this is actually where I think Abu Dhabi and the UAE in ADQ has actually thought, let's actually invest in crypto mining. And they've put in over $1 billion of order for mining equipment to actually start mining Bitcoin using clean energy, which is nuclear energy here in the UAE. So I think, there's definitely a scope for central banks, governments, private companies, large corporations to actually use cryptocurrency and use blockchain technology. And, there's huge multinational companies that have Bitcoin in their balance sheet as treasury because they know that traditional currencies are losing their value over time. So there's a use case for it, there's a need for it, there's benefits for it everywhere.
You mentioned the word education in one of your comments, and I wonder how you feel, because it still does feel that there is, at the very least, a kind of two-tier structure within society, those who know, those who don't know. I think an event like what's happening here at Art Dubai in the digital section and the talks and everything, hopefully is contributing, trying to bridge that gap. But I mean, given, if I don't think I'm wrong to characterize you as being extremely, not just optimistic, but firm believer that this is really going to change many aspects of our lives. How do we ensure that there's more demystification, there's more education? I mean, is this something that should be taught at school, like from the get-go, do you think? And not just at university level and PhD level? And is there because it seems to me there's a real gap there. I know many academics who've told me they feel very disoriented by what's happening because in a sense it feels much more further ahead than even what the academic or the university space is aware of, other than special departments, of course.
Yeah, I think with universities and undergraduate programs and certificates and education, there are blockchain technology courses out there. I think eventually, especially probably in the UAE, because they're embracing blockchain technology, at some point you'll find it being taught in schools. I think as it becomes more and more widely adopted, then you'll see the need for education. I believe firmly that people should have at least a basic understanding of blockchain technology. I know that it took me 6 months to have a kind of just a basic understanding of blockchain technology. It's complicated. It's not very easy to kind of grasp. But if you just put in a little bit of time where you can to understand it, then that will go a long way, because at some point, all the banking applications, all the digital banks out there are going to be using blockchain technology. But maybe at the moment you see it on the front end, but at some point it's going to be in the back end, and you're not even going to know that blockchain technology is being used. But I think it's prudent for any government or any country, if you want innovation in a technology, if you want innovation in something, then you have to teach it at the grassroots, and you have to provide education around it at the grassroots. So I think the UAE is very forward-thinking, and I wouldn't be surprised if schools start teaching about blockchain.
And my last question, because we were on a very tight clock, apparently we all get thrown out at 6 o'clock, like Cinderella. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I don't know if you've had time yet or not, to see what's happening in the Art Dubai digital space. There's 17 different galleries, platforms, DAOs, all presenting different, not just NFTs, but different kinds of digital art, of which NFTs is. How do you feel about all of this and the fact that this seems to be mushrooming, and it's happening in a place like this? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I think NFT as a technology, as a use case of blockchain technology, art is perfect for NFT. I think NFT is something that can tokenize or give value to a financial asset or an asset, and art is one of those things. It just makes it much more efficient to actually transfer ownership of an asset from one person to another using NFT. I think the use case of metaverse is growing rapidly, especially because Facebook have now renamed themselves to Meta. So if Facebook believes in the metaverse, then I think a lot of projects out there are picking up on that, and a lot of people and investors are picking up on it. And I can see from what I'm doing in the investment space that a lot of investors are putting a lot of capital into NFT as a use case and metaverse as a use case, and I can see the benefits of it to art. And one of our advisors is an NFT artist. He creates art and he digitizes it. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely a reason why people are excited about these use cases coming up, because it touches everyday lives, it touches traditional assets like art. So I wouldn't be surprised if that keeps developing, and it's still very early days, and I think there's a hell of a lot of innovation that needs to happen in that space, but it will happen at some point, and there is excitement because there is a reason for it to be excited about it.
It's something very tangible, yes. It seems to me. I mean, beyond, because the sort of financialized aspect seems to me relatively, if you're like you're not a hugely known artist, you can create a unique piece of art, digitize it, and you can have royalties from people buying it and selling it and so on. So there's a lot more options for people to own their assets instead of having middlemen who kind of take
part of the, the revenues from your own assets. So I think that's something that's extremely important as well, especially for less known or up-and-coming artists.
Amazing. So we have run out of time, but it's really been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Will you please join me in thanking Saeed Al Darkmarki?